Okay, so I'm going to talk to you a little bit about institutional failure, and I'm going to talk to you about institutional failure when it comes to racialized minorities, black people, Asian people, and people from minority ethnic backgrounds. And so before I start to talk about this, I'll introduce myself a little bit. So I've been working in academia for over 2 decades as a pharmaceutical scientist. My particular speciality is drug development and drug design. And we tend to work with nanotechnology. I also have a spin-out company, and we're developing a new medicine for a new pain medicine and trying to sort of overcome some of the limitations of opioids. We've had loads and loads of failure, as you can imagine. I mean, more fails than we've had successes. But recently we licensed out a piece of technology and an asset to another company, and they're doing the clinical development. And so that we felt was quite good after multiple failures. So without further ado, I'll sort of launch into what I want to say. And it is a question of there isn't real racial equality at UCL. There are total deficits when it comes to the outcomes, and I'll sort of show you some data on that. But at UCL, we have recognized this quite openly, acknowledged it, and we're trying to tackle it. And that really is what the talk is all about. And I feel particularly privileged to talk about this because I've spent some of my life living in Nigeria as a teenager and a young adult, and went back to Nigeria just after a civil war. So I understand that differences between people are not generally just resting on the visual identity, the race, and there can be other differences that actually explode into a civil war. So when I went back to Nigeria had just come out of a civil war, and my secondary school had no infrastructure. And so it was a big shock. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me because I could see people that looked like me in positions of authority. And so I had role models that I could look up to. So first of all, about ethnic diversity and inclusion at UCL, we do have a very skewed staff profile. And as you can see here, this is sort of looking at UCL's 13,000 odd members of staff and where they're placed according to ethnicity. Sorry if the numbers are very small. For those of you at the back, can you see any of these numbers at all? Did you want to move to the front? Is it now? So I'll just talk you through them. So the very first set of bars are staff in grades 1 to 6. I think at UCL, we don't really have staff in grade 1, do we, Fiona? We tend to have 4 to 6, I think. And if you look at the golden bars, these are staff who have declared themselves to be from black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. The next set of bars in the middle, the larger set of bars, these are staff on grades 7 to 8. And what you can immediately see is that the proportion of staff on grades 7 to 8 diminish when they're black, Asian and minority ethnic. And then these final set of bars here, these are staff that are on grades 9 and 10, our most senior staff. And what you can see there is then the golden bars become a very, very small sliver of our staff. About 18% of our staff are from black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds, but about half of those then get onto grades 9 and 10. So institutionally, the outcomes for staff who are black, Asian or minority ethnic are not good. It's actually more difficult for such staff to get promoted and to reach the top grades. And I view that personally as an institutional failure. I mean, I don't know whether, what do you think about this data? It's an interactive session, so feel free to say something. Does it surprise you? Not really, so it's kind of expected. But I think what I would like when we leave here is for you not just to be unsurprised, but also to feel a little bit angry about this kind of data and that we shouldn't accept it. That's what I'd like us to actually feel. Now, we know that these kind of racialized outputs are not limited to UCL, and that's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that UCL should be a beacon for change and a beacon for good practice, because we lead in many fields and we style ourselves as a global university. And so I put this up here to show you that actually when it comes to the different sectors, there's good participation by all ethnic groups. So these numbers are the percentage of the different ethnic groups working in the different areas. So there's reasonably good participation. There are some areas where you see, for example, there are more white people working in construction than Pakistani/Bangladeshi individuals. And there are more white people working in manufacturing and more Indian and Pakistani and Bangladeshi people working in transport. More black people working in the public sector, for example. But generally, there's good participation of all ethnic groups in the workforce. But as with at UCL, when it comes to getting to the top, then if you're black, Asian, and minority ethnic, of course it's more difficult for you. This report here looks at the FTSE 100 companies, and actually shows that when it comes to directors, only 1.5% of these directors are both British and from a black, Asian, and minority ethnic background. And the total, when you include international workers, is about 8%. And only 9 people are actually heading those boards as either the chairman or heading the company as a CEO, who would describe themselves as black, Asian, and minority ethnic. So quite clearly, society is no different from the university. But we decided at UCL that things should be different. Yeah? So I actually would say that there is societal failure of people who are black, Asian, and minority ethnic. You don't even have to look at the numbers. You can read the Daily Mail. That'll give you the answers you need. What about in academia? The situation is similar. In the UK, 13% of the population describes themselves as black, Asian, and minority ethnic. And when it comes to participation, is quite good, mirroring what we have in society. But of course, when it comes to being a professor, then the numbers drop off. And this is across the sector. And then if you are unfortunate enough to be female and black or Asian or minority ethnic, then your chance of becoming a professor is quite low. Okay, so this really shows you that there are various pressures in the system that are causing these kind of skewed outputs, and these pressures obviously are not ideal. It doesn't just stop with staff. When it comes to our students, we also have these very negative outcomes. Now, this is quite a busy slide, and this data is taken from our internal database. That's why the numbers are so small. But I'll talk you through it. This is from 2009-10, 17-18. And the green bars represent the proportion of students who get a good degree. A good degree that an employer wants is a first-class honours or a second-class upper division degree. And the little grey bars are those who either get a 2-2 or a third-class degree, which is not considered a good degree. When I went to university, I got my degree in 1981. A 2-2 wasn't a bad degree, but we've moved on. And so a 2-2, I didn't get a 2-2, by the way, but a 2-2 is no longer a good degree. Now, the bars start with the black and minority ethnic students, black, Asian, and minority, and then you've got the white students for each year. And always you can see that the white students outperform the black, Asian, and minority ethnic students, and that goes across the piece. And it happens every single year. Sometimes it's a very narrow gap, but there's always a gap. This is unacceptable because the students come in with similar grades. But by the time they come into university, and our job is to add value, some students have lost their competitive edge. That's why I say this is unacceptable. I'm not the only one that thinks it's unacceptable. The Office for Students also considers it to be unacceptable, and they have now set targets for the sector to get rid of this unacceptable gap. We have a small gap at UCL, but it's still unacceptable because our students are some of the best students in the world. Some of our students come in with 4 A stars as degrees, yeah? And very few students come in without having at least 3 A's at A level. And we've actually done the maths. When students come in, we've determined that 88% of our students, according to a widely acknowledged sort of metric, should get a second-class upper or first-class degree. Our students overshoot that mark because they have very high A-level tariffs. So students come in with that competitive edge, and then they end up with this gap. But you know what? I had a look at this, and I had a look at what happens in the educational sector. And when we look at the attainment gap, we only consider UK domiciled students, so we are not confusing language or culture. We are looking at UK domiciled students. Now, when you look at what happens at Key Stage 2, 10 to 11, and these are literacy and numeracy, very basic standards, 2/3 of pupils will achieve this standard. I mean, I don't know what it's like for you, but I think it's unacceptable to live in a country where 1/3 of 10 and 11-year-olds are not achieving this really basic standard. This is not the 11 plus. This is just a basic standard in literacy and numeracy. But anyway, that's not for us for today. Chinese pupils outperform the rest, as do Indian pupils. By Chinese and Indian, I mean pupils who describe that as their background. And black pupils are the same as white pupils. By the time we get to A levels, so, 7 or 8 years later, what do we find? The Chinese pupils still maintain their edge because the average is about 11% of pupils will get 3 A's. So the Chinese pupils are still outperforming. The Indian pupils are outperforming, and the black pupils have been left behind by the secondary school educational system. Now, there are very small strata of students that have 3 A's or 2 A's and a B. They will come to UCL, minimum. Those are the minimum qualifications. Now, this, again, is not UCL, but it's looking at the sector. And I'm going to leave this slide on because it's quite busy. But what you can see, what's the first thing that you notice when you look at what happens to students in the sector when you look at the degrees compared to the A levels?
79% of white students from 11%, they've gone up to 79%.
Yeah, so this is 11% with 3 A's. So they were underperforming. And what about the other students? What do you notice there?
So the Indian students have a good relationship with the black students. Half of them are getting a good degree, following on the trend from the A levels as well.
Mm-hmm. But what's happened to the Chinese and Indian students? So what you can see is that at UCL, I don't know, most of you are in academic positions, I believe, early career researchers. How many of you want to go into academia? Some of you are wavering. Well, some of you will go into academia. And all I ask is if you go into academia, you be mindful of this data and understand that when we stand in front of students, we have one goal, and that goal is to add value to our students. If we don't add value to our students, and students who come in with a competitive edge lose out, then we haven't actually done our job. So that's all I'd like you to bear in mind. Now, these poor stats go on to feed into the workplace, because if you're a black worker, you have a payment gap of about 23%. Sorry, these are very small numbers. If you have a degree, you already have a pay gap. And of course, it feeds on from what's happened in university. Now, this is what's happening, but we know that if we have ethnic diversity at the top level, at the decision-making level, we actually have better outcomes in all walks of life. And I'll give you some data. So London companies, if they have diverse management teams, they tend to introduce more innovative products. Yeah? So actually making sure that when people actually come to UCL, they get the degree they deserve, so they get the job they deserve, is important for us as well as for these other institutions. Making sure that if staff come to UCL, they're actually promoted according to their ability and race doesn't come into it is actually good for our organisation. And if you have ethnically diverse teams making decisions, they're smarter. They rely on the evidence and they don't rely on dogma. And this comes from juries as well as from pricing stocks. Yeah? So having an ethnically diverse team means that you will have to rely on the evidence when you make a decision. And it goes on and on and on. If you look at companies, 600 companies were looked at, and those that have ethnic diversity in their management or their boards were more profitable and doing better on the stock market. This is a McKinsey report, well known. The same with gender. If you have women in line roles, revenue-generating roles, you tend to have a more profitable company, better outcomes. And those of you that publish also, having a diverse group of people working on a problem, you'll get more cites. And I know we don't only publish for the cites, but hey, who here doesn't want more cites? I want more cites. So one to bear in mind. And then I always show this slide. If you have inequalities in society, you have a lot of societal malaise associated with these inequalities. And so very unequal countries like that one and that one, they tend to have higher levels of murders, people in prison, obesity, mental health problems. So there's a clear correlation. And if you're living in countries like these countries, then there are less of these problems. So it's in all our interests to strive towards having more equal societies and more equal organisations. Why is it important for UCL? It's important because we have a high proportion of our students coming from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. So it's very important that we do not have racial inequality at UCL. Racial inequality as measured by seniority and the number of people that are in senior posts. Racial inequality as measured by the outputs that the students have. And under the Provost's leadership, we're starting to do something about this. So we went for the Race Equality Charter. We looked at all aspects of our processes and procedures, made an application for the charter, and we were successful. We submitted in 2014, and we were successful in 2015. And we're now working on the renewal of this charter. What did we find when we prepared the document? We found that the staff that were Black, Asian and minority ethnic were less likely to be promoted, more likely to be disciplined, were less satisfied with UCL, and the students that were Black, Asian and minority ethnic were less likely to come out with a good degree. We had an action plan, and we've been working through a number of actions. And this is something that the senior management at UCL has decided is important for UCL. And the vision originates at the top. The equalities team works outside of the provost, works out of the provost's office. We also go around and we articulate the added value of diversity, the things I've told you. We have a majority of students coming from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds. We owe it to them to make sure that when they come here, they get a degree that is devoid of any racial prejudice. That's what we owe to them, because they are our demographic, they are our market. When you look at the UK, there are more ethnic minority families sending their children to university. So 24% of UK undergraduates are for Black, Asian, and minority ethnic families. We understand that we're going to get better institutional outcomes, better decision making if we have ethnic and gender diversity in line roles. And so we are preparing for this next submission. We have done a lot of work with raising awareness, going round to the faculties and pointing out the importance of this particular agenda. We've got the deans to make pledges on racial equality. Has anyone seen those deans' pledges? Some of you have, okay. Well, those of you that haven't, just Google Dean's Pledges at UCL and read the pledges. And we've got Vice Deans of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion. For the first time at UCL, we have senior, 2 minutes, okay. For the first time at UCL, we have senior members of staff who have this as their agenda. Yes, and this is very important. And some of them, surprise, surprise, even have budgets. So, you know, we're inching towards a better future. We've got some things that have been pioneered by Fiona's team, fair recruitment specialists. These will sit on interview panels and make sure the right discussions are had when we are recruiting people. We've got this inclusive advocacy scheme. Is anyone part of this inclusive advocacy scheme? Oh, great, some people are. I met some of the protégés and they said this was the best thing that had ever happened to them in their career. They're paired with a senior member of staff and the goal is to get them promoted within 2 years, or at least to get them to apply for promotion. We have a management program that Fiona's team is developing, and there are committee shadowing opportunities. So lots of things that people can get involved in. Because I'm short of time, I'll race through the others. We have a Centre for the Study of Race and Racism, headed by Professor Paul Gilroy. And this is a distinguished scholar who recently won the Holberg Prize. It's a very large prize, lots of zeros in that prize, and recently won for exceptional work in the social sciences. We also have does anyone know about the Centre for the Study of Race and Racism? There, some people do. And we also have a eugenics inquiry. Have we heard of that? Yes, again, trying to understand where we stand in history on racism. And this is led by Yola Sholanke. And we have a UCL statement on race. This was drafted by the Race Equality Steering Group, started off by Dr. Kamna Patel. And this has been adopted by Academic Board, nodded it through. We've taken it to the senior management team as well, SMT, and we're going to present it to Council very soon, in fact, this week. So, and this is a very important statement, simply because this statement signposts, where is it now? White ethnic minority enjoy privilege. They have a privileged position, which we have to acknowledge when we're trying to level the playing field. We're starting to see a little bit of success. So we're seeing that in grades 7 and 8, going from 17% in 2017 to 19% in 2018. Grades 9 and 10 going from 11% to 12% in 2018. And we're working also, this is the attainment gap across the different faculties. It's appalling, but we're working on that because the Office for Students have also now set targets. And we have staff working out of Anthony Smith's office looking at, which they're not calling the attainment gap, they're calling it the award gap, because actually it's my fault, it's not the student's fault. So that's a good acknowledgement. What can you do? You can work in these areas with fair recruitment specialists. Make sure that if you see discrimination, challenge it. Work on the award gap once you start teaching students. There's a whole bunch of resources. But personally, for your own development, because you're obviously here because you want to get on and you want to get on well in UCL in the sector, build up a support network of peers and mentors. Always apply for promotion. Yeah? When you see an advert coming up and you see a position, apply for it. And, you know, because people always wait until they're completely ready when they apply. But you know what? You can apply when you're half ready, because you'll get some feedback which will help you. Always seek real feedback. If you ask for feedback and they say, oh, you're not strategic enough, you don't have lateral thinking, ask them, what do they mean? Give me an example. When you were sitting down in the interview, they said, give me an example when you've done blah, blah, blah. So when they say you're not strategic and don't have lateral thinking, give me an example. Yeah? So they give you real feedback. Always ask for more money. Always. Always say, it's never enough, I need more money. And I'm going to stop there because I can see